Hello, my name's Andrew John Teague. Many people will know me from Nap or Dads, both actually. My journeys throughout the UK and in parts of Europe. Um, Many will have heard me talk about the children and how the children are affected through the trauma through family courts and the trauma that they go through even after family courts through into adulthood. Basically, what I want to talk to you about today is my own childhood and how it affected me, and that's how I relate quite a lot with the trauma that children go through their life. From a very young age, my parents split up, like I suppose a lot of other parents. There was, I guess, a bit of a war zone on with the both parents. My sister was with my father. My other sister and brother were, and myself were with my mother. The relationship with my mother and her new partner wasn't very good. My stepfather used to throw me about the walls, beat me, black and blue, in drunken rages. Worst part about the drink was we lived above a club, so he was often very drunk and very abusive. To the point that one day, having been in trouble at a young age and being in the courts, I wouldn't even say he was reluctantly. I asked the courts to put me in care. I did not want to go back to the abuse. I felt that if I did, that I would have been seriously hurt or even killed. The amount of times that I was physically beaten as a young child. From a little place called Aberdare, way down in South Wales, between Swansea and Cardiff. Um, not I suppose a massive place. It's known a lot on the map. A small little town in the valleys. So I'm actually a valley boy from my birthright. Although I live in Swansea now, and I find Swansea is my home. Um, so basically, when I was in the courts, I asked them to put me in care. I was immediately taken from Aberdare courts by a social worker uh, over 100 I think it's about 127 miles from South Wales to North Wales in Wrexham, a place called Bryneston. Some people may have known of the child abuse in North Wales, and some people may know the care home Bryneston, where I was, I guess, a resident there as a young child. And I have to emphasize this on the young child because this is just the start of the unfolding of the trauma that I went through when I was a child. Whilst in Bryneston, I was sexually abused by two members of staff there. Currently, one had been sentenced to prison, the other was due to be sentenced and was in the court process, but unfortunately died of a heart attack, so skipped the actual sentencing side of things. The reason I'm bringing this out is because that trauma caused a massive, massive impact on my life. Um, it gave me what they stamped me as a child with a psychologist was beyond care control, didn't like adults. That's what the psychological assessment they had done on me. Beyond care control, doesn't like adults. They never bothered to wonder why. They just stamped the label on me. Beyond care control, doesn't like adults. Obviously, the reason I didn't like adults was because of what had happened to me. I lacked all trust in adults. I lacked all trust in the judiciary. I lacked all trust in the social services or anything to do with anything, what had happened to me, to take me 130 miles, however far it is, I think it's probably 120, 130 miles, and leave me in a place, a vulnerable child, where I was sexually abused, was nothing short of um, trauma at its worst form. During a period of time, the trauma that I went through, the nightmares that I lived were relived again in the 90s because of the investigations into the child abuse in North Wales, which opened up all the new wounds and scars to myself. But during that period, up until the 1990s, I'd had a failed relationship. I had had um, missed communication with my children, my first two children, my two daughters. Um, and my head was completely and utterly screwed up. I'm not going to deny the fact that I was, any given chance, I think I'd be fighting back against the system. I think there was always a point that I'd always write things down and think, right, I'm going to turn around and say this in the family courts, not in the family courts, sorry, in the courts for what was done to me. But I never got around to doing that. But I always felt that I had the burden carrying with me for so long after everything that had happened to me. And I think it was only helping other people that brought me to the realization that stopped my I guess the criminal activity that I had. There was times I don't take drugs, I don't drink, I don't do anything, but there was times years ago when that was a part of my life. I was glue sniffing, gas sniffing, I was taking acid tablets, I was taking all sorts of other drugs as well when I was younger. And that's why I've always come round to the fact of knowing the trauma that children go through and what children happen with children later on. It doesn't stop when one parent is stopped from seeing the children are stopped from seeing the other parent. It continues and it eats at the trauma, eats at these children. And that's why we are fully aware that children can end up in all sorts of things that we don't want our children to be involved in. I would never want our daughter or any of our children to be involved in any of the things that I went through as a child because of the trauma that I went through. My sexual abuse in my younger days um, give me nightmares, give me horrible nightmares, give me horrible times, give me struck fear into me like there was no tomorrow. It was more scary than anything I'd ever known. It was humiliating. It was torture every day. Eventually, when I'd left there, my nightmares did not stop. My nightmares eased over a period of time. But they were all rekindled back in the 1990s when they decided to do the inquiry after the whistleblower had blown open what was happening in the care system. And I always remember the things like people around me, and I remember running away with one of them, and it never ever told me, and nobody ever told me what they were going through as well. And so you think it's only you that's going through it. But then when you see the behaviors of some of them that were there, and you look back at the people that you knew that was in there, and you see the behaviors now as an adult, and you look back, you think to yourself, my God, there's certainly undoubtedly something going on there as well. That's what gives the insight of knowing the effects of the trauma base that happens to children that goes on into their adult life. I guess I'm lucky in a sense that during a spat, I guess in prison in the 90s, I'd met someone there that helped me through things, plus a psychologist, a psychiatrist that had helped me brief meeting with, explained everything to me as far as the suicidal tendencies was that made a lot of sense. That, you know, there's only one thing worse than a suicide, and that is a failed suicide, because you could end up in a wheelchair, you could end up God knows where else, and then you have people looking after you. Also, what he'd explained to me was the trauma that you're releasing to other people. For example, if I go and throw myself in front of a train, or I hang myself, someone's going to find me, people on a train are going to see something, and that is trauma that I'd leave behind with other people. And that's something I don't think I'd ever wanted, because I know what trauma was like. I know what living the trauma was like. And I don't think I'd want anybody else to go through any form of trauma. I relate a lot to what happens to children when they go through things, and they don't understand it neither, because I certainly didn't. I was a young boy that looked to the system, the magistrates courts for help. I looked to the social services for help in putting me in care and asking them, like, save me from what is happening to me at home, to be put into the worst nightmare that I've ever been put in my life. And on times it was very hard for me. It was very, very difficult for me to come to terms with a lot of things, and it's certainly made me want to give the whole system a damn good kicking, and fight back at the system. Not that that is what I'm doing now, but I understand what children go through with the trauma and how it follows them through their life. And even recently, with people don't realize that they poke and prod around with things from my past, and they don't realize the effect it has on me, because I still feel a lot of things. I used to feel a lot of shame about what happened to me, until I spoke to someone once. His name was, and if he is ever out there and he hears this, Robert Kitts his name was. And I met that guy in Swansea prison as a listener, and I was only in there a very short period of time, and that guy really helped me through the trauma that I was going through. You had no idea the impact that guy had on helping me understand that we all have demons, and we all need help at some point or another. And I've found that helping other people and whistleblowing, whatever it is, I don't class it as that. I call it as crying out to other people to give them the opportunity to get the help that they need as well, was a massive help to myself as well. And doing this with children now it makes me see the good in so many people that I've come across through this. It makes me see the good in knowing that these children are having some form of help. If we can push the boundaries and get people to help these children, I'm sure that that's what inevitably will happen, that these children will not carry any forms of trauma through their life as well. And we have to look at the future development, and part of that future development is avoiding the mental strain and the mental distress that children go through because of separation with families, the hostility, the bitterness between families, the whatever reasons there are, that children are dragged and entrenched in this. And it's absolutely harrowing to see. And I constantly see this outside. I speak with people, through reports I see this, and also through the family courts, being involved, helping people in the family courts to see this. And it is horrendous that these children are put through so much trauma. And I know what trauma is. I have lived the trauma. I have come through the other side of the trauma. I'm one of the lucky ones. I came through. Not many people will know that there were certainly young boys that was in that care system that had taken their lives. And this is what we mean by people who take their lives through the trauma. There was actually even some that had killed their partners or been murderers. This is reality of what happened with so many people in the 70s, so many young children in the 70s who were used as just pass the parcels. Basically, that's what we were. We were just used and abused. Some of us have chosen to make a difference with our lives, with other people. And some people might find that hard to believe, that some people will do things for other people without wanting anything in return. And some people may poke at that. But the fact is that once you've lived the trauma and once you know what has affected you in your life and how helping other people makes you feel happier with yourself and more comforted with yourself in helping other people, then you truly understand what helping people is about. Selflessly helping people. But unfortunately, like in the 70s when we were in the care system, there was monsters among us children. It's the same throughout the years. There are always the monsters amongst us. The ones that want to poke, that don't understand, they have no idea. And the ones that will go on, they say so, hearsay or anything else. In my life, I have shed rivers of tears. I remember when I was in care, hiding in cupboards. I remember threatening to throw pitchforks at one of the abusers because they used to knock me on the head to remind me every time, knuckles on my head every time, to shut my mouth, otherwise I'd know what was coming. People have no idea what we went through. People have no idea how many have been lost through the whole horrendous time back in the days I don't even like to recall, to be quite honest with you. It's damned hard sometimes to even embrace emotionally. Sometimes it's very difficult. Even by today, I think working through everything has been the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and I've had to stand on my own doing that. There was the offer of help that never came, and I'm sure that there were certainly others that had the same thing that never came. It was almost as if it was like, well, if we was a woman that had gone through something, they would have probably helped more. But because we were men, because we were boys when it happened to us, but we were young men when it was actually came around, and they opened up the wounds, they cut open the scars that we had buried to put us through everything again. And many of us wanted to shut that chapter down in our life, and nothing seemed as though anything was real that people were actually doing around this. And I think a very lack of trust certainly run through everybody that was involved in this, and rightfully so, as anybody is aware that there was not just one review, but then there was another review, the public inquiry, and God knows where else. And even recently, one of the ones from the North Wales, from a different care home, has just been sentenced again for another 14 years on the child abuse scandal in the 1970s. One of the things we would like to make people aware of is that people visited these places before they became people who were involved in these places. There was people were passed around with people who were, like we was nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm an adult now. I always took up martial arts because I thought nobody'd ever touch me again. And I swore that would never happen again. And even as you go through your life, there was a very long time when I wouldn't, a massive amount of time, that the psychological effect it had on me was I wouldn't If I went into a toilet and there was too many people in there, I'd go out. I wouldn't go to public toilets. There was a lot of things that made me feel uneasy about things. If I felt closed in somewhere, it was another thing that I didn't feel right about, because things were not maybe possibly that I couldn't control the situation myself. So it put me in a, if I was in a vulnerable position, then I felt vulnerable. And it was very hard for me to deal with because of what had happened to me over a long, lengthy period of time. And I guess realizing things myself, I guess it was like I've never been into football, rugby, or any of them kind of things, because that's where you're all in changing and showering and everything else. And that was not, there was a lot of things that I guess was taken away from me because of what had happened to me. If people can understand that, the things that normal boys from normal family life had come through, and that had no problems and didn't care about anything else. It was really affected me. You associate when you go for football and everybody goes back and they're all shouting together and all this, that and the other. Well, that was nothing, anything that I felt that I could do or anything else, because I always felt I didn't want to feel like I was in any vulnerable position. So there was a lot of, there was things taken away from my whole life. And I don't suppose, I never had them, so I don't know if I'd ever missed them, but I did enjoy martial arts, which helped me with self-control, and it also helped me with possibly even releasing some anger and some hatred towards a system that put the shackles on me then that length of time ago, and left me alone as a young boy, vulnerable, in the abuse that I was put through. This is not easy for me, because part of me, especially when you relive things, this is why I've always pushed, I think, certainly for kids, to protect them from any of the things I've been through, or from what children are going through. Researching a lot of what happens to children after this process is damaging children. It's abusive. Anyway, please, I just wanted people to understand that I've lived trauma through into my adult life. I've come out the other side of it, but some have not, and that's the same thing. Even with the family courts, that these children have put through trauma, and there's that potential for some of them not to come through the other side. Um, I don't know what to say to end it, to be quite honest with you. I don't know how to end the video, how to end this. Something that's, I suppose I could just end it on saying children deserve far better than what they're getting. And that sometimes can mean from both parents. And that certainly can mean from a system that is failing children. whichever way you put it, trauma is trauma. And we need to protect children from everything that they go through and give them a steady base to start from.